You've been watching this special election series, so these are the last few episodes going out.
Since 1996, BJP is the preferred national party for Karnataka.
The 24 manifesto looks like a
radical document.
Yeah, a radical document. And what influenced Congress in trying to give it a more left tilt?
Whether BJP wins or does not win, there is likely to be some disturbance. It can cause a law and order problem. And I think all state governments and the central government have to be ready for it.
The Congress has absolutely no mass movement which is involved in the grassroots. And it uses progressive movements such as yours as legs to enter the grassroots.
Were we a perfect democracy in 2014? Certainly not. Therefore, I keep on saying we were a democracy just about in the making. Then the last 10 years was a rude and a very, very cruel regression. If we come back somewhat to the rails, I don't know, on June 4th we will know. Otherwise, the struggle is going to be even harder. Then we will have a lot of repairing to do, but we also have to do the repairing side by side with all this introspection and reform.
The most influential ism in the country today appears to be Hindutva. It has taken a long time for this ideology to come of age. But what happened to the other ideological movements that began in the early 20th century? The RSS will turn 100 years old next year, but so will the Communist Party of India. Ambedkarism, Marxism, liberalism, Dravidianism, feminism, Gandhiism. What role are these great big isms of the 20th century playing in the 21st century? What relevance do they have today?
I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaun.
Why have there been casteism existing in the country still today?
Feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal
So the
rights.
nature of the system is to be as mean and rotten as you can, to try to maximize profit.
The national elections are around the corner, and what better time than now to talk about isms? I'm Sudipto Mondal, and welcome to this special election series of What's Your Ism? Hello and welcome to yet another episode of What's Your Ism? Right now, for this discussion, we have somebody who is known all over India, who is involved, who is collaborating with movements across the country. Somebody who started off as a journalist and now is somewhere between an activist and journalist. Teesta Setalvad, thank you so much for coming on this show. How are you doing, and how is the Josh in the opposition camp?
Oh, quite in terms of civil society, it's a kind of interested opposition, if you like, though we retain our independence. And there is a kind of anger and focus, a renewed focus after last night's exit polls. So, yes, I think the focus is very much there, and a lot of energy is still very much there. Just to add a little bit, that I still like to think of myself very much as a journalist, as much of an activist. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, that's the line that's got blurred for all of us, right? I mean, the line between journalism and activism. I mean, the very act of, practicing straightforward journalism has become a form of activism now.
And I think the notion of objectivity as is supposedly projected is anyway an anathema in a post-liberal world, where everything is already guided so much by the market, and I think the market determines that objectivity. So it doesn't really make sense,
Right. So Teesta, this show is called What's Your Ism? We try and discuss ideologies. Now, before I get into that aspect of, what are the ideologies that you're collaborating with, how you're taking this movement forward, you're also somebody who is very closely, who has been closely following these elections. I want to hear your prediction.
I think it's when you're kind of put in the situation where these overwhelming numbers come in from entrenched exit polls, and I was just talking to a very senior journalist in North India who's been covering things on the ground, and he pointed out something to me which I'd missed actually, though it was in the pink pages 3 days ago. And when I say pink pages, I mean nothing less than the Economic Times, which is an interview by Matt Matthew of Julius Berger, which is one of the biggest financial agencies in the world. And in his answer to his first question, when he talks about how hopeful the market is, Matt Matthew actually says, And I could, if you allow me, I can quote. He said, actually,
Yeah, please. Yeah.
we are very happy. We are very sure this government is coming to power because many of the pollsters are actually funded by the exact words that I believe those pollsters would have gotten wind of the elections now, and they are all in the employ of fund managers and fund managers who have been selling. So now, what does this mean? I mean, for a person who's not a business journalist, who's not an economic whiz, it's a bit frightening and a bit confusing because it actually means that something is happening which is outside politics, right? How did we cover elections in the past? We went on the ground. We went to, I remember covering Datta Saman's election from the South Central constituency in 1986 or 87, historic election, because first time a Labour leader got elected to parliament, It was a kind of a milestone. And actually to cover it, I even went back to his village in Konkan and actually traced a lot of things about the textile workers, their families. And he actually won that election. And the Kamgar Agadi had a seat in parliament. So, one has covered elections from the ground. And even this time, I think in particularly 4 or 5 states, one has looked very closely at what's happening on the ground, if not traveled everywhere. And I think one way of doing it is to look at the record, of course, the history, what happened before and all of that. Secondly is also to look at the kind of voters who are enrolled, those number of voters who have been excluded from the rolls, because that's become a big issue now for the last 10 years or 15 years, that large numbers of people from the Dalit communities, from the minority communities, women are suddenly being struck off the rolls. Adivasis are being struck off the rolls. And therefore, you have this voters must get enrolled program of the Election Commission, but it doesn't really reach the last man or the last woman on the street. So there's that issue. There's also the issue of this overwhelming propaganda that we are seeing, particularly in the last 10, 12 years. It was there before. It was also there before. Akshay Mukul's book talks about it beautifully in the Gita Press and how it was proliferating in the consciousness. I covered it to my detriment in Gujarat when I saw those hate pamphlets actually out for a year and a half before the genocide actually happened. But this has taken it to a new level because this comes onto your phone, it's on your mind, it's there everywhere. And I've seen what's happening to young people with that WhatsApp because it's actually, even before you actually process it, you're forwarding it. And I feel that it's taking away your ability to, which we used to have when we picked up print media, which is to, yes, okay, this article has appeared. What do I think about it? Agree, disagree, critique, process it. But you're not processing a WhatsApp. You're not processing it all. You're just simply, either if it suits you or doesn't suit you, you're kind of reacting to it. And therefore, it's taking a very basic and elemental level of our cognitive faculty, which is the ability to adjudicate about what you're hearing, And therefore, you're consuming it. You're just consuming it, forwarding it, etc.
No, I get this. Yeah, no, sorry. No,
So therefore, how do you cover an election? And how do you assess an election?
I was actually, how do you cover an election is one thing, and with the ground changing so quickly under us, with each election we are learning how to deal with those circumstances and how to cover those things, right? For example, one of the things I just couldn't cover is what was happening in Chhattisgarh because I was there during the assembly elections. I couldn't go back there in the course of this thing because there are rampant killings over there.
And nobody's talking about Chhattisgarh and those killings anymore.
At all.
There was a period in which there was an amazing movement which talked about the felling of trees and the felling of people along with the trees, which took place about 6 months ago.
And the thing about how the election somehow provided a cover for these killings in Chhattisgarh, right? And, everyone's busy with the elections. And therefore, I said that, we have to discover new ways of what election coverage really means. And there are things we just couldn't look at, like in Gujarat, in the Gandhinagar Assembly constituency, Kavita Krishnan and group went over there for a fact-finding mission. They found rampant voter suppression in that constituency, not just candidate suppression, which is also something that happened. Anyway, so we will, of course, we do know...
So my point is that having said all of this, I feel what has happened this time and what is a little different is that a pretty robust and thorough effort by independent on-ground journalists who might also be in digital media like you or on YouTube channels or in print, but more than that, movement leaders, activists who are actually working on the ground have stepped out of their specific movements, which might have to do with labor, might have to do with farmers, might have to do with women, or might have to do with environment, and actually got engaged in the poll process. Okay, it's the first time I think.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about it. In fact, that will be the real big middle of this discussion, where much of our focus in this discussion will be that.
So I feel the assessment is much more accurate. That's what I wanted to come to. I feel therefore the assessment from the ground becomes closer to accurate than it ever was. It was almost as close to what it was when I covered Datta Saman, which is actually you're going around without being influenced by bombarding or propaganda and actually trying to get a feel of whether there's a chance for this leader who's been a trade union leader to make it to parliament, which had never happened before for a long time since Dange.
You started talking in the beginning actually about the larger struggle, about what lies ahead of us beyond these results. And let's focus on that, because that's really the ideological question, right? So therefore, I want to ask you, in this formation, the common minimum program is secularism, because I saw the range of organizations that were part of your Yedelu Karnataka. Somebody's a communist, somebody's probably has some roots in the ultra left, somebody comes from Muslim groups, somebody comes from Dalit groups. Now, going forward, secularism does not mean the same thing to each of these groups, right? And I just want you to kind of take your time to talk about how difficult it has been for you to build this kind of a ideological platform around the issue of secular. Because, I mean, you are involved in what? The NRC movement has your involvement. You have some 30-40 full-timers in Assam. You have people in Karnataka who are again connected to your movement in Gujarat, in Maharashtra. And Maharashtra, you talked about how, I think, did you people play a role in the coming together of these Republican parties of India? Like there was a federation of Republican parties.
I was very much part of the inception state. At the inception state, of course, it was their initiative, but they were kind enough to invite me through the process.
Yeah, I put like 3-4 pegs around. So there's Karnataka, there's Assam, there's Maharashtra, there's of course Gujarat, and how difficult is this?
So it's a very important question you've raised, and I'll definitely talk about it. But I just want to, before that, just preface it by a little bit that what are the spaces that the election has opened up, and which are the spaces, I'm talking about the public discourse, and which are the other issues that have actually still remained in the shadows and silences, which are very upsetting for me personally, and particularly for our groups who are involved in a certain movement. So I'll just start like that and then get to your specific question. I feel that it's been an overwhelming sense of relief, if you like, after you're dealing, because apart from all the other work we do, we deal with this hate monitors, which means we've got this very vibrant team of 10-20 people, including lawyers and journalists and documentalists, who are just listening and complaining and legally complaining about the hate that is being generated in print, on social media, by the power brokers, by the ruling party, etc. So it's a very, very toxic kind of public discourse that we've seen in the country over the last 10 years. You'll agree with that. So in the midst of that, to suddenly have an election campaign that has allowed and opened up spaces where you have discourses on unemployment, distress, inflation, however cliched those issues sound, they are real issues of the people, joblessness. Maybe the Nari Nyaya scheme is only got to be giving about 1 lakh rupees. I don't think it's about that. It's about actually empowering that woman to actually come out through her family out of the distress, and maybe then look at economic and social mobility and all of that. So several issues have come up. The farmers' movement, which has actually made sure that it stays central to the entire political campaign, and it's an amazing movement. I was talking to a farmers' leader yesterday. In fact, I did an interview with him. In the Kalauri border, what the government did at the Kalauri border was absolutely appalling. And because this government has literally declared a war on all sections of its people and is just bombarding us, we forget what's happened just in February this year, which is the kind of drones and the kind of sharp bullets that even killed one young farmer. They're not real bullets, they're like very sharp rubber kind of bullets and all that. Yes. And the drones and the tear gas and the cementing of the road and the barbed wire. So, it's appalling the way the state has started to behave under this government. So, in that context, to see certain issues come up and being actually expressed at public rallies, and to hear young people talking about them, women talking about them, it's been hugely refreshing. Actually, one never expected the 2024 election campaign to be dealing with these issues. One thought it would be a defensive campaign. Having said that, I think what really pains me is the invisibility, the real invisibility of the issue of secularism and invisibility of Muslims in particular and Christians from the discourse, the religious minorities from the discourse. Dalits are being talked about peripherally, not too much, but peripherally, a little bit. OBCs are very much central. But I think that the invisibilization of the Muslim, particularly because of the demonization of the Muslim, and the Christian by association because he or she is a religious minority, and of course Constitution and Ambedkar and all are being talked about. But I think the Dalit issue did come up in UP in a very interesting way. I'll mention that in a bit, but indirectly. But I think I'll just deal with this. The invisibilization of the Muslim community, given the humiliation that the community is being made to suffer, the marginalization, the humanization, the stigma, the slur. I don't have to tell you about it. You're equally sensitive on the issue, whether it's the lynching or whether it's the hate speech and all of that. Social boycotts. Karnataka had it. So many states have had it. That it's very sad that was almost not allowed to come out. And there was a consensual conversation around that. And I must say I was party to it. And I can't even say, though it hurt, though it was a problem for me, it hurt a lot to have to agree to that. But one saw that just now, one has to just achieve this much and then maybe talk about that later. But the other issue similar to this, which really upset me, and I discussed it yesterday or day before in an interview with Malige, was the issue of gendered violence. I think was not there enough, And I think the gendered violence, and that hurt me as much as the Muslim thing, because, just look at what women have had to undergo under this regime in the last 10 years, which is not to say that there were never crimes against women earlier. But just look at the 3 or 6 months that our women wrestlers were protesting in the cold of Delhi. Look at Hathras, look at Unnao, look at Kathua. 5-year-old girl inside a temple. It makes me just shiver when I think of the symbolism over there. What does that symbolism mean, that when you're doing this to a young Muslim Bakarwal girl inside a temple?
It seemed like human sacrifice to me, honestly, that particular case. It seemed like human sacrifice, that case.
Yeah. It's at multiple levels. It's the most, and then the accused are using the national flag, just that like they used it Ekhlaq and in Dadri. So it's a perversion at so many levels, and then you have Prajwal Revanna, an issue that was handed on the platter to the political class, and of course you had some very good speeches by Alka Lamba and Supriya Shineth who spoke about it, and Mahila Congress doing a few things repeatedly, but it was not central to the opposition discourse, and just as the invisibilization of the Muslim was not. So I think, therefore, now coming back to your question, that so many spaces were opened up, but not enough.
How did you build this? Yeah, how difficult is it to build solidarities?
And therefore, I think there's a long way to go, that if we actually going to ever dream of a transformative politics in this country, which is not just to get the fascists out, but to also think of something else, which relates to the people, relates to all the Indian people with their diversities and their complexities, then I think we have a long way to go.
Right. So now, one of the things that has been said about the civil society movements this time is that they are the ones who literally set the narrative, which now we'll see the results, what the results say. But if the opposition does well, let's assume, it is largely to do with the narratives that were set by civil society groups, by left groups, by Muslim groups, by Dalit groups, by anti-caste groups, women's groups. These are the movements which are grassroots movements which set the narrative in these elections. Even if you look at the principal opposition party, so to speak, the Congress, in its manifesto, it looks like the Communist Manifesto, right?
It looks like a fairly interesting and radical document, if not perfect. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, but the criticism really from you do know of this great intellectual from Karnataka who writes prolifically, Shiv Sundar. Right?
Oh yeah, he's a dear friend actually. Yeah. He's a dear friend, and
he's a dear friend of all of us. He's a guide, a mentor to meet as well as a journalist. So Shiv Sundar is very critical of these associations that have been built between civil society movements and the opposition political parties which have contested in this fray. Right? And one of the things that Shiv Sundar was talking about is that these parties really don't have a mass movement. The Congress does not have an active labor union or an active students union or an active women's union or a Dalit movement, so to speak. The DMK has none of that either. The less said about the TMC, I suppose, we'll let that be for later. But these are parties which somehow, in a sense,
seem to be up in the clouds in the sense that they don't have any legs on the ground. And you people have become the legs of these parties. Is the criticism, the ideological criticism from, I won't call a Shiv Sundar a hardliner or a Puritan, but somebody who's a thinking left intellectual.
No, I think it's very welcome. I'll just start off by saying I think it's very welcome to have that constant check and that constant criticism coming up for these kind of associations. I just like to make myself very clear that as far as my association is concerned, it's extremely focused and limited because one is very, very conscious that at the same time that one is engaged in this stuff, one is also battling the same opposition parties in many of the states where we are working. But I think, like I said, it's a very valid criticism because I don't think we should ever forget all the groups that are involved, that we are essentially battling repressive policies of political parties in the state. And as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the legacy of the citizenship crisis in Assam, a lot of the legacy of communalism in this country has come from the leading opposition party and how it opened the doors for a much more, even more regressive approach by the proto-fascist BJP. So one is very conscious of this all the time and one has battled that. If you look at 92, 93, Bombay, and all of that, all of that. So I'll still say that, like has happened in many parts of the world, not just America, but Brazil and America, when there was a transition inquiry commission set up when Trump was there, there are still moments, or the emergency for that matter. Why not talk about the emergency as well, where there was the same party that's in opposition now, a leader of that party was otherwise much respected, suddenly decided to call an emergency, and it was a very repressive 18, 19 months. To defeat the emergency in 77, why did we then ally with the Janata Party? Why did civil society was in a different form? It obviously things have evolved, but it did, and it was again a people's mandate. The Janata Party was like a khichdi. Everyone said it's not even like the India Alliance, which is a well-established alliance of 28 parties. It was just a cobbled together thing which happened in 2 or 3 months. The mass movement of Jayaprakash Narayanji was there on the ground, but the political opposition was just cobbled together. But yet people allied with it and said, we want the Janata Party. Why? So I think there are moments in a country's history, and this is certainly one of them. Let me finish. Certainly one of them, which is that why do we call it a second freedom struggle? Second freedom struggle. Because you really believe that what we fought for against the British, and what was the Indian freedom struggle? Multifarious, multi-ideological, from left to center to even right, And yet it believed that what the colonial powers were doing was a complete exploitation, economic, social and political. And therefore they had to get out. Now, what we are seeing is as regressive a complete corporatization of the Indian state, a complete loot of public resources, a complete transfer of public resources to private capital, and a far socio-religious right ideology, all coming together. So the very nature of the state is turned against its own people. And therefore, it's not a Republican democratic state. I say in so many of my speeches, when I give them publicly, that were we a perfect democracy in 2014? Certainly not. We were broken, we were we were two-statist, we were not people-driven, yet there were spaces for people's struggles to echo in parliament, to get laws passed. How was the Forest Rights Act passed? How was the Right to Information passed? How was Manrega passed? It didn't happen because the Congress or the left suddenly decided. No, it happened because the mass organization of the left and certain people's movement came together and said this kind of law is needed because of their struggles on the ground. So spaces were there. That space is completely being taken away now, and therefore I feel that the engagement just now with this vast mix of civil society movements, people's movements and all that, with the current India Alliance is valid. None of us are under any illusion that we'll be back on the streets struggling if they come to power.
Fantastic. No, that's very well put. And actually, yesterday I was speaking to Vasu, and he said something very interesting also. So he said, it's about what is achievable. And, Vasu comes from a formidable left background, and, the Jan Shakti, before that, what is that, the Vimochana Ranga and all of that. Now, he said, people are accusing, you might have picked up, there are some of these voices which have started calling Edelu or Idina, a Congress mouthpiece or a handmaiden. So he said, well, the reverse can also be true. He said, if the accusation is that we are being used by the Congress, we are also using the Congress, and that there are actual gains to show on the ground. If you look at the guarantee policies, if you look at some of the things that Congress leaders have started saying on questions of communalism, he said that is the influence that we have had on the other hand. So I pose the same question to you as an extension, saying, what do you think are the main gains that we have got and we will hopefully get in the future from these non-Hindutva parties? Can we call them non-Hindutva parties?
I would put it very differently from Vasu, because I don't look at it as gains, because I think this is something that is due to us, okay? This is due to the people of India, so there's no gains. I think this is something that the governments and the parties should bloody well have been thinking of even earlier, some of the guarantees they're given. So I don't see it as gain. However, I will say something, and I'll come back to my city, my precious city of Mumbai, which is where my social political activism started. We had this horrible period in our country, COVID, right? The 2 years of the 1.5, 2 years of the COVID pandemic, and that the way the lockdown was called and all of that. I don't want to get into that. In Maharashtra, at that time, by a peculiar mix of political circumstances, we had an alliance in power that was extremely ahistoric. I mean, you had actually Uddhav Thackeray and the Shiv Sena with the Congress party and the NCP coming together to form the Maharashtra Vikas Aghadi. Now, I'm deliberately referring to this because that's the last point I want to make in this very interesting conversation. Because I think this is what opens up a lot of possibilities for the future in terms of a lot of transformation in politics, and that also leading to some transformation on the ground. And that period of that 18 months, 2 months of when we went through that that horrendous period of the COVID crisis, Maharashtra was handled with great sobriety and responsibility by Uddhav Thackeray. Okay? And it's a very recent memory, and it's a very tangible memory that people have. Okay? And I remember then conducting an interview with some young Muslims who had just come out of the 2020 violence and, a lot of bitterness in Jamia area and all. I was one of the first ones to flag the 2020 incarcerations and all that. So we were constantly having interviews and conversations. But this is later on, around June, August, September, after that first period. So that we had a good relationship, but they were saying, how can you be talking about Shiv Sena like this? How can a person like you be talking about Shiv Sena? So I said, life is, and politics is also about observing the changes that may or may not take place. And if I see that the Muslims in Maharashtra, the same Muslims in Mumbai and Maharashtra who are really bad, and I can't decide for them. If they feel secure and safe and have started a conversation with Thackeray, Uddhav, then I cannot suddenly sit on my ideological high horse and say that how the hell are you doing it? I have to try and understand what's happening, right? And what was happening was that you suddenly found that things like the mosques being opened up for COVID wards and all of that, Uddhav then making a very emotional statement which went viral saying, Maharashtra should be grateful to the Muslims of Maharashtra for allowing these extra spaces. Very small things, but they're actually very big, and they actually translate to certain trust building on the ground between communities that have seen 92-93 when Shiv Sena was the major offender. One can't run away from that, okay? Now that's the background. Now you come to this election, and this election you find that the all that happened in Maharashtra in 2022, and Uddhav Balasaheb Thackeray's party is split, NCP is split, and now you have therefore this test. Maharashtra is seen as one of those test cases. I'm very confident that Maharashtra is going to be one of the states where we're going to get firm number of seats for the MVA. And there I might even predict a number which is 25 to 31, 32. Which will go to MV. I'm 24, 25 at the lower level and 30 to 31, 32 at the higher level. I'm confidently saying that because one has really moved around. So there, I feel what I saw happening on the ground, and I also saw happening personally, which I thought was very interesting, is that I'm in Mumbai Northwest, right? That's where I vote. And that's where this thing. And I had the Shiv Sena candidate actually coming up to me and through all the local shakhas. And because we work with the shakhas when there's a flood, we work with the shakhas when there's COVID, because you have to work with all the local communities. So they all know you. There's a lot of trust, regardless of the fact they know there's ideological issues. But there's a lot of trust, human trust. So they called me up one day in Marathi and said, Tai tumi kute aayat and all that. Amul Bhau wants to meet you. And who's Amul Bhau? Amul Bhau is my candidate, who says he wants to come and see me and said, can you expect our support? I said, no, certainly, because this support is for you, your party and for this alliance. And then what I see happening, trickling down, is small and large meetings across Mumbai and Maharashtra, where you have Muslim women sitting with Mangalsutra-clad Maharashtrian women, attending public meetings, political meetings, 300, 500, 2,000, 5,000. For me, this opens up tremendous possibilities. It's not enough, huh? It's just a beginning. I see that as a beginning. So I feel this is a gain of a very different kind. It's not a scheme, but it's actually not social. I don't like the word social engineering, because often this political social engineering doesn't really mean that castes are intermingling or communities are talking to each other. But if we actually have this deepened interaction between the Maharashtrian Hindu and the Maharashtrian Muslim, I think it will be huge, because there are cultural issues, there are social issues, there are political issues, which will then slowly start getting spoken about and dialogue. And I think that is a huge space that has opened up with this election. And for me to see Tushar Gandhi standing on the podium with Uddhav Thackeray and saying, it's just unimaginable. And then actually him saying that, I am great, my Bapu was actually saved by Prabodhan Thackeray, who's, I didn't even know that historical fact. But these things become then part of the political discourse. That, imagine a Thackeray with a Gandhi. It's just something you couldn't imagine 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So I think these are things which are very, very, for me, they're quite exciting and important, And I think they're showing that some things are moving, some things are changing, maybe not enough, but they open up a lot of spaces.
No, just to add to that, since you brought up Prabodhan Thackeray yourself, some of the interviews that I've had in the lead up to this one, a lot of Ambedkarite Dalits have been very impressed, or who have engaged very seriously with the Shiv Sena, or have started engaging seriously with the Shiv Sena because of this entire anti-caste tradition of the non-Brahmin movement in Maharashtra.
Absolutely.
Shivaji, you have talked about...
I was going to come to that last to say that has also been because of the way they perceive Uddhav Thackeray, who's actually making a clear outreach to these groups, not just for electoral ends, but even to understand what it means to govern. You see what I mean?
And as a result, when we say doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani, that analogy, people have started seeing the BJP as a Brahminical party and the Shiv Sena as a non-Brahmin party. And
which it always was. Shiv Sena was always a non-Brahminical party. If you read Prabodhan Thackeray, because I read Marathi, there is a stringent critique of Brahmanism and of the RSS, by the way, and of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak.
This entire Peshwa culture, and there's a lot of criticism of that. And that is when, I want to go back to a word you used, which is invisibilization. Now we talk about how, there are broadly the victims of communalism, of Hindutva can be divided into, or can be pointed out as two communities, right? Dalits and Muslims. And
Christians also, to some extent, though they're very small, Christians also.
So the Christians also, definitely, of course. Now, if you keep aside Dalits for a second, you look at this Mahavikas Aghadi, one of the things that stands out is in the alliance has not posted a single candidate from the Muslim community in the whole of Maharashtra. You look further still, you go into the INDIA alliance, and there's at one point he was considered the new communist icon of the country, Kanhaiya Kumar, is going around in Delhi without mentioning the Delhi riots.
The point is that when I said invisibilization, I meant the political invisibilization, the absence of representation, not giving tickets. There is no question about it, and we cannot run away from it. And it will have to be something, whichever way the results go. Even if they go the BJP NDA way, it's not something we can run away from any longer. Even if we can't run away from that any longer. We have to re-centralize, refocus on these key issues after the 4th, the 5th, 6th, 10th or whatever it is, because I think this is central to India's diversity, pluralism, and our commitment to constitutionalism, for heaven's sake, because it cannot be selective. It cannot be selective.
Okay, so this is my last question. We have about 10 minutes left. Okay, so you talk about going back to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals in India are made up of, let's say, 3 isms. You have communism or the left ideology, you have the anti-caste ideology, which has many shades, and you have, I can't call it the Muslim ideology, but you have organizing along Muslim lines. There are organizations among Muslims, and for some reason, these 3 have always found it difficult to coalesce with each other. So going forward, if you start with the left, the left has always had this problem of not recognizing as much or not giving as much importance to the question of Muslims, and Dalits. If you look at the Dalit leadership, you will find that they have often faltered on the question of class and on the question of what is happening to the Muslims and the Christians. And if you look at the Muslim leadership, you invariably find that they have no caste understanding. Gender is again a problematic issue over there, and definitely there is no class-based agitations happening over there, despite the fact that the class question directly affects the Muslim population in this country. So therefore, in terms of emerging isms, like the Shiv Sena example you gave, the transformations that have happened over there is an indication of emerging isms. In your experience in dealing with these kind of groups, your Yeddelu Karnataka, your formations in Tamil Nadu, the people who are with you in Assam, these are actually a combination of these three types of people only. They are either leftists, or they are Muslim, or there are some kind of anti-caste people in the Teesta universe, let's call it that. What kind of changes would you like to see? What kind of changes are you seeing in this? We'll leave that as your parting question. Take your time to answer this.
Thank you. Basically, I'd also like to say that there's one major ism that I think you've left out, which is socialism, because the Lohiite socialism is also a very big thing in India, huge. And whether it's the farmers' movement or even the workers' movement and their antipathy to the Congress, it's a very deep-rooted movement, the socialism movement. I'm not saying socialist movement, if you like. The Indian socialist movement is also something we need to factor in. But having been a very valid question you raised, and I think one of the issues for Indian society and the state also, for the first 60, we're now 76, 77, 78 years old, has been that, though we adopted a certain ideology in terms of the constitutional framework, there were not enough efforts made by community leaders, political leaders, whatever, at the societal level to actually transform some of these basics, whether it's the directive principles of state policy or the fundamental rights, into communities and their governance, So, and our state structures also has not done. So you see, our state also reflects that rigidity. So even our institutions of state, be it the courts, be it the institutions of governance, with the election commission or any commission or anything, our education structure, our teachers, our professors, our academia, they are not really reflective of the vast diversity of this country. So how much have they really opened up for Dalits, for OBCs, for rural India, for the Grameen part of India, for women, for Muslims, for Christians? So this deepening and widening of state and society has happened, absence of that has happened hand in hand. So there's a huge task ahead. And therefore I don't like the word reform, but these whole social reform movements that you saw, what Sir Syed brought, or what Rajaram Mohan brought, or what, or you had in terms of in South America, you had this whole liberation theology movement, where you actually turned from inside communities, you turned things on their head. And you said, listen, face this, speak about this, discuss this, talk about the caste and class and gender for the Muslims. Who is representing you? Who is your face when you talk to the state? I had this issue with Sachar committee also. I had this big argument with that. I said, you've not talked about security issues of the minority. And where is the gender dimension in this report? So, there were even the best of reports, like the Sachar committee, which actually focused and showcased a certain level of complete deprivation among the Muslim community, did not speak about their security issues and did not speak about the gender dimension. And that time when we took a lot of meetings taking the Sachar committee, I said, why is the state and the community afraid to negotiate with the women leaders when there are so many of them? There already are so many women leaders of the community who are doing this work, who are articulate, who can understand the problem of the community. But somehow neither the state nor the society leaders, community leaders want to. So there is a lot of work to be done. Lots and lots of work to be done. And I think a lot of it also requires our own introspection as to are we also diverse? Are we also inclusive? I mean, we take a lot of pride in the fact that our Assam team is actually representative of the society of Assam. There are Muslims, there are Matwas, there are Namashudras, there are Santhal Rajbanshis, and there are Bengali Hindus. So I think it's important that the faces of your movement, the faces of the work you're doing also are representative in terms of society. And then that needs to transform, and we need to start talking about the diversity in the judiciary. We need to talk about diversity of representation in parliament, in assemblies, in panchayats, all of this. So I think, therefore, I keep on saying we were a democracy just about in the making. Then the last 10 years was a rude and a very, very cruel regression. If we come back somewhat to the rails, I don't know, on June 4th we will know. Otherwise, the struggle is going to be even harder. Then we will have a lot of repairing to do, but we also have to do the repairing side by side with all these introspection and reform.
All this introspection, reform, and building from scratch.
No, and being conscious of it. No, it took me a long time to get conscious. I mean, I was from a liberal family. I was from a bourgeois liberal family and became inclined towards the left in my university years. But it was in those university years, because it was a vibrant political movement, that I understood caste. You know? And then I went back and I said, told my father, you got this fantastic library at home, 5,000, 7,000 books. But how come you don't have enough about Phule and Ambedkar and caste? You have much more of the other. So, these things happen when you start getting conscious of it. And you start addressing it. And you start working with on those issues. And yet I think this constant self-reflection is very, very important. Very, very important.
So great. That's the big question, I suppose. How do you make caste, class, gender, and religion part of the pillars of your movement? That's the question I suppose we are constantly dealing with in What's Your Ism. That's unfortunately as much time as we have for this discussion. Teesta is a very busy person. She has to run and set out fires in different parts of the country. Teesta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sudipto.
I'll see you soon as you have a bit of time. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.